Hello there, welcome to Over at That Day. Today we're going to spend a few minutes just talking about some knockouts. I've just done a little list of about 10 knockouts. Start off by saying I hope everyone is well, hope you're all doing okay, far and wide, near, whatever, near, far, wherever you are. Hope you're all doing good. So today I'm going to talk about some knockouts. I've done a little list. It's not going to be, I'm not talking like 10 to 1 greatest knockouts ever. These are just a list of ones I really liked. I'm going to do some more episodes based on knockouts and maybe finishes and things like that, but just a quick video basically talk about some. As I said, this is not a list going from 1 being best, 10 being worst, whatever. This is just a list of knockouts that I put together. So we're going to go through them here. I picked these based on, I suppose, a lot of things. Some being the circumstances around the finish, maybe the pressure on the fighter, some being the way the finish happened, number of reasons, but I'll talk through them as I go. First on the list is probably a pretty obvious one, but it's Tito Ortiz versus Chuck Liddell, number 1. As in the number 1 fight they had, as obviously they fought 3 times, not counting the fucking third one. But anyway, the reason I picked this was obviously there was a huge rivalry between those two. There's a documentary out called Bad Blood. Tito versus Chuck is a really good documentary if anyone hasn't seen it. Don't ask me where you get it now, but it's worth the watch. You kind of hear the background. 2 guys, that used to be friends, I think, or used to be training partners, ended up becoming obviously opponents and sworn enemies. But the reason I like this one again was the rivalry. I'm a big Chuck Liddell fan. Not that I dislike Tito, but I'm more of a fan of Chuck. But the reason I like this, if you see the finish, Chuck was known for having power in his hands. But what I really liked about him was, especially in that fight, is when he saw he had Tito hurt. You see Tito's backed up against the cage. It's his accuracy. Because Tito, he shelves up, obviously covers up, knowing he's in trouble. And Chuck Liddell, he's putting every bit of his power into it, but it's not just wild swings. He's picking his shots. You see he goes around the guard, underneath the guard, trying to pick just that perfect spot to where he's going to drop Tito, and eventually it works, but it's a barrage. It's over. Like it's constant. He just keeps hitting them left, right, and it's uppercut, cross. It's one of my favorite finishes just based on the speed, the determination basically to get him out of there, but all while keeping his accuracy and his technique at the same time. And obviously Chuck Liddell is well known for his knockout power and stuff like that, but great finish. That's in particular why that's one of my favourites, is how accurate he was in a moment where he wanted to get the finish so much, especially against Tito. So that's number 1, number 10, whatever you want to look at it. Next one will be, this is one of my favourite all time as well. Obviously there's so many going down through the years. I'll probably say my favourite of all time a lot. But what they say is it's Amanda Nunez versus Chris Cyborg. You'll know from some previous episodes and in the podcast I'm a Nunez fan anyway. Again, don't dislike Cyborg, but I am a Nunez fan. She's a good character, I think. One of the reasons I like this as well was kind of a little bit similar to the Chuck fight, but this one was, Nunez was an underdog, which is rare, especially now. Very rare to hear that Nunez is an underdog. But one of the things and I picked this before the fight, my brother will attest to this, but I'd said before the fight I thought Nunez is a bit more accurate with her strikes. Cyborg probably has a bit more power, and she's a bit, she's vicious, but I think Cyborg is a bit more wild in her striking, and that's what I had said at the time. And for once, again, I was right in one of my predictions. But in that finish as well, it's the same as kind of the Chuck fight. Nunez realised she has Cyborg hurt and comes in with just 100% power, but accuracy as well. You see every shot again, it's measured, it's timed, it's full of power, but it's not just wild, head down, overhand rights. It's accurate, and it gets Cyborg out of there in the end. but such a good finish, and especially against Cyborg, who was seen as the top, if not the best, one of the best women ever to do it. And this kind of set Amanda Nunez on, really put her up there as, well, she is already the women's GOAT. There's no disputing that. But again, it's the accuracy while having an opponent hurt. You see that in a lot of fights. Even the top fighters, they get a bit, like sharks, they sense blood and they go in for the kill. But sometimes they lose their technique or lose the accuracy, just trying to get the person out of there. But it's so cool to see, like I said, with Chuck and with Nunez in this fight, where she picked her shots but just put every bit of power into them at the same time as well. It's really cool to see, really cool to watch. And her celebration after the fight was really cool to see her lying down in the octagon and just delighted with herself, obviously. But that was, again, another one of my favourites. So moving down the list, this one is super obvious, but I have reasons for it as well. It's Jorge Masuda versus Ben Askren. I know as well, going down through this list, especially this year, Joaquin Buckley with his knockout and stuff like that, but I'm not going to pick the totally obvious ones. Askren obviously is very obvious. But I have my reasons to pick them, that's all. So going down to the list, and I will have more as I go, but these are just guys. I picked a 10, wanted to get 5, but of course it's quite hard to stick to 5, so I went to 10. So I'll do another episode with more knockouts as we go, maybe some submissions and things like that. But the third one, as I said, Jorge Masvidal versus Ben Askren. If you haven't heard about this knockout, then where the fuck have you been? This was the fastest, I think it's the fastest KO in UFC history now. But again, this is another fight where there was a lot of bad blood between the two guys. In particular, Ben Askren doing a lot of talking before the fight and irritating Jorge Masvidal. But for those of you that don't know, I know a lot will, but Masvidal knocked Askren out with a knee, which was only 2 or 3 seconds into the fight, and knocked him out cold. It goes down on record, I think, as 5 or 6 seconds, but that's only because it took the ref so long to get there. That fight was finished within 2 to 3 seconds of the start. But what was cool about it, which you find out later, that a day or two later after the fight, was that every bit of that knockout was planned. And you see, if you go back and watch it, you see where Masvidal he's leaning up against the cage, as the referee says go, and he's just real calmly walking out, and he veers off to the right and then sprints at Askren. It was all planned. They planned that in training. His coach being Mike Brown from ATT, they planned it 100%. They planned it, and it's to see it work out perfectly to the way they planned it is really cool. But just the way Masvidal's whole kind of body language and the way he sold it to Askren, you can see, because people don't know how good Ben Askren was because he's such a shit run in the UFC, but really good, top of the heap for wrestlers, but even his technique, to when he leaned in to catch Masvidal as he came running in, was horrible technique. Even for just a fucking beginner amateur like me, you could see there was rotten technique. He leaned in with his head, but it was just because Masvidal completely put him off. The leaning up against the cage, real calm, and just such a good knockout. It'll go down as one of the best ever. But it's just a shame that the way they have the time on the record books it's not accurate. It was about 2 or 3 seconds, but I suppose they can't officially stop the fight until the ref gets there. Well, yeah, obviously the planning that went into that is the reason I really liked that fight, that knockout. Next one, probably obvious too. Michael Bisping versus Dan Henderson, their first fight. Again, this is another huge rivalry surrounding it. The two of them coached on The Ultimate Fighter. Team UK versus Team USA, I think, wasn't it? Or am I wrong? No, it was, yeah. So obviously Henderson coaching the USA team and Bisping coaching the UK team. And that season was kind of built up for the USA were supposedly going to kick their asses, because mostly based on the wrestling background of a lot of the American fighters. But the UK team went in there. I can't remember what the record or how many fights they won to the USA team, but I know they did pretty well. I think Ross Pearson was the guy who went on to win that season. But yeah, really good season, and a lot of banter over and back between the teams and between mostly Bisping doing the talking. Anyone knows, obviously Bisping being a legend, but he loved to talk shit too. And Henderson in their fight, with the knockout with the overhand right. One of the reasons I liked this too was Henderson's technique, and I know it's small technique and it's not anything that's going to blow your hair back, but for me it was really cool, especially at the time. I remember seeing it, I believe it was in my brother's house, watching it way back. And if you watch it, like, obviously Henderson puts fucking everything behind that punch. I'd say half of Bisping's family in the UK felt that, but he throws his leg lightly. Henderson throws his left leg, which is his lead leg. He throws that lightly in like he's going to do a leg kick, which is probably enough to put Bisping off. So just flicks it forward and then absolutely hammers him with an overhand right. And Bisping is out cold when Henderson hits him, but obviously after that he wanted to get one more in. He leaps through the air and lands with, it almost looks like a WWE elbow. Lands right on Bisping's face with that too. And I remember he said in the interview afterwards he just wanted to hit him one more to shut him up a little bit longer. But I think it's one of Henderson's logos now as well, as that thing of him leaping through the air, landing on Bisping. It's his team logo, or his I don't know, is it a supplement company he has, or is his team, whatever it is. But yeah, super knockout as well. It's on, people probably have seen that on a ton of lists already, but it just, again, for the story behind it is why it's my favourite. Moving on, the next one, this one has nothing to do with the story behind it, nothing to do with any, not even the technique, it's just the horrendous power behind it. This is Francis Ngannou versus Alistair Overeem, which is not that long ago. It's only last year, I think, maybe the year before, but not that long ago. It's one of those, those knockouts where when you see it happen, it's crazy and it's such a powerful knockout, but you almost freeze because you fear that it's like he killed Alistair Overeem. It's like he took his head off. You can almost see his soul leave his body. It was like a shovel. The finish came from, both of them were kind of swinging, and Ngannou kind of stepped to the side and just threw a shovel, almost like a shovel hook. So not the best technique, like an uppercut / hook, and it just took Overeem's head off. I've never seen the way Overeem's body reacted. His chin almost like flicked up. The back of his head hit the back between his two shoulder blades. The power behind Ngannou's shots is sickening. Thankfully Overeem was okay, he didn't die, but I don't know, I feel like a part of him had to have died. But the whole basis around that is the sickening power that Francis Ngannou has. And that's with his bad hand, That was with his left hand. I think it was with his left hand, from what I remember. But a sickening knockout, sickening power. And against someone like Overeem, who's obviously long in the tooth, he's around a long time, but anyone that watches Overeem, you see he gets better. Like, he's 40 years of age, but a super technical fighter, knows, he uses every bit of his experience. So to get caught like that shows the kind of, like I said, sickening and horrendous power that Francis Ngannou has. But anyway, moving on the list. Next one is not a super common one, and not one that a lot of people may remember. It's not that long ago, but it's just, I think it was only on a fight card or something like that, and both fighters are later in their careers, but it's one of my favourites. Was Matt Brown versus Diego Sanchez. It was on some fight night. Look, I couldn't tell you when it was, but it's not that long ago. It's in the last couple of years. And again, what I liked about this was the technique and how vicious Matt Brown was in the finish. So it's kind of a bit of an exchange happens between the two, and Matt Brown catches a Diego Sanchez kick with his left hand, I believe. So he just catches it and he runs Diego towards the fence. So obviously Diego's hopping on one leg, but Matt Brown raised his leg up, so obviously Diego's kind of off balance, and he comes over the top with an elbow, cuts right through Diego's guard and just knocks him out cold. But I loved the technique in that, and Matt Brown is one of those guys who, around a long time, but loves to use his elbows, which I love to see. It's something you don't see as much anymore, I don't think, is people using proper vicious elbow strikes. Well, yeah, I love that. I've replayed that knockout so many times, but just the way the technique and raising his leg, pushing him to the fence, and as he got him there, then just cutting through him with an elbow like that nearly split him in half. Yes, that's out of the entire list. That's one of my favourites. Because that's what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're getting through the list. Next one is Derek Lewis versus Alexander Volkov. So the story behind this is my reason for picking this one. Good knockout. Maybe not as good as some of the others on the list, but my reason for picking it is obviously people who don't know Derek Lewis follow him on Instagram. He's got one of the funniest Instagrams out there. Maybe him and Darren Till are fighting for that award, but two of them are hilarious. But this fight, like Alexander Volkov is a very technical heavyweight fighter. Much leaner than some of the other guys. Really good movement. He's heavy-handed, but not as heavy as some of the other guys. But he wins a lot of his fights based off his really good technique. And in this fight, he was beating Derek Lewis up. I don't think this was a main event, so I think it was only 3 rounds, from what I remember. But he was beating him up. Derek Lewis didn't look like he was in the fight. He was, typical Derek Lewis. He was trying to take his head off, and Volkov's movement and technique was kind of stifling that or neutralising that. But like within the last dying seconds of the fight, I couldn't tell you exactly what the time was, but it was in literally the last seconds of the fight, Derek Lewis lands one of his shots, and the first shot takes the mouth guard out of Volkov's mouth, and you see it has rattled him a little bit, and then he just pretty much ends him on the ground with a ground and pound. But he was out cold, and it's just the story behind that is that it's funny as Lewis was completely losing that fight, and typical Derek Lewis fashion, just needs to catch you once and he will put your lights out. So that was again my reasoning for picking that one. Moving up the list, we got next one is a few years back, Lyoto Machida versus Randy the Natural Couture. Another one that's been around on a lot of lists, but I like this simply for Machida's technique. He does the, whatever you want to call it, the jumping switch kick or Karate Kid style, or call it a scissors kick in football, I think. What I liked about this is he stood, like, how dare he do this to Randy Couture at the time, but I think it was Randy Couture's last fight, I'm pretty sure. But he kind of stood, square right in front of Couture and just kept kind of, faking, switching his stances and stuff like that, and then he just jumps with a fucking Karate Kid crane switch kick and knocks Couture out cold while knocking his mouth guard out as well. Super technique. But Machida's got that in him. He's done that a few times. He done it not that long ago to Vitor Belfort before he left the UFC. But yeah, really, really great knockout, and that's another one I think it's on a lot of lists as one of the best knockouts ever. The next one as well is going to be super obvious, but it's hard not to put it on any list. Probably tops most lists, to be honest. Like I was saying about Joaquin Buckley's knockout recently, it's not him, but I just have to compare the two. Obviously that knockout went viral, or Buckley had his leg caught and throws a back spinning kick. Brilliant technique, and rightly so that it's up on the list, but this one is far better in my opinion. It's obvious though, but it's Edson Barboza versus Terry Edom, and it's again a back spinning kick. But the technique in this it's perfect. It's perfect. And Barboza throws it so fast. It's the way and the coolest thing about it is how he gauges the distance perfectly. Because he takes a step back before he throws it, and it's just perfect technique. You see a lot of these kicks, sometimes they land, they might hit the side of the head, the back of the head, where really you want to hit their chin with your heel. That's where you get, the result, the desired result. And that's my favourite thing about it, is the technique that Barboza uses. He just steps back a little bit and obviously gauges the distance, and he lands this perfect spinning kick on Terry Edom, and as soon as he touches him, there's no more, he doesn't need to do any more. He knows he's out, and it's probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest knockout in the UFC ever. Well, it's up there. But yeah, just technique alone, it's hard not to have that one on your list. And then the final one, not the best, not the worst, but take it or leave it. Again, this is for the story around it, mostly. The knockout itself, not amazing, but it's based for the story around it. It's Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey. I remember at the time I didn't know a lot about Holly Holm, and unlike a lot of other people, I'm a Ronda Rousey fan. I know she's disliked by quite a lot of people, but I've read her book and the story behind her career and stuff like that's quite cool. If you hear, you understand kind of why she was such a bitch in the UFC and why win at all costs was kind of her attitude towards fights. But obviously the story around this was Ronda Rousey was being her usual bitchy self, in face-offs and things like that, squaring up to Holly Holm. But throughout the whole lot, Holm was quite calm. And to be fair, I was on the side of thinking Ronda Rousey was going to win this, but there was a lot of whispers about how good Holly Holm's striking was. And you heard from guys like Joe Rogan who, spotted these people. And outside of the UFC, I don't know a lot of these guys coming in, but at the time I didn't really know who Holm was, but Holly Holm. But she had like a outstanding boxing record and same kickboxing record, won many titles in both. Obviously Rousey was known for not being the greatest striker, but if ever there was a fight that super highlighted that, it was this one. And I remember watching that fight live, and there was a moment in the fight where obviously Rousey was doing her usual, just trying to get close, get personal and clinch. And there was one point where she was throwing strikes and she kind of ran at Holm, and Holm ducked underneath her and came out the other side, and Rousey basically nearly fell against the cage. But she'd done that so quick, and I remember seeing that, and when I saw that, I couldn't tell you what the distance was between that moment and the knockout, because I can't remember, but I remember when I saw that moment I was like, oh shit, this is not going to go Rousey's way. You just knew that Holly Holm's movement was not just one step, but 5 or 6 steps ahead of what Rousey had. And she wasn't too bust up at that stage, but Holm was landing, some jabs and some strikes, but it's just a movement. She got out and away from Rousey so quick. By the time Rousey had turned around, Holm was right back out in the middle of the cage, waiting for her again. And I remember perfectly seeing that moment. I was like, okay, this is not going to go Rousey's way. And obviously the strike happened with, the knockout happened with basically Holm landing a couple of shots, and Rousey had turned her back, kind of stumbled, turned her back, and she lands this head kick kind of underneath Rousey's arm coming up, hitting her square, and knocked her the fuck out cold. She landed a couple of ground and pound after that, but it was over by then anyway. But just the whole story around that fight, obviously Holly Holm, wrongly so, was an underdog. Ronda Rousey being her, being the GOAT, the women's GOAT at the time. Such a big step up for Holm, but she, it was brilliant the way she finished that fight with a lot of pressure on her. But just we want to call her a masterclass, but just basically showing why she showed in every way, in every part where Rousey was lacking. She showed how she's on such a different level striking wise, and that's why, as I said, being a Rousey fan at the time, I wanted her to win. But it's just one of those moments where you watch it and you go, oh shit, this is not going to go her way. But it was a cool fight, and that's the end of my list. I will have some more episodes like this where we talk about knockouts, maybe some submissions, and I'll go through maybe some of my favourite moments, whether it be knockouts or wars in the cage, things like that. We'll have a lot more videos like this, so hope you fuckers enjoyed it. Keep tuning in, keep liking, sharing, all that kind of thing, and we'll keep putting up more content. Thank you guys, hope you enjoyed. Take care.